Coming up next on the Cultural Connections podcast, a gun shop in Newton, Massachusetts. We'll be joined by Tariq Lucas, Counselor at Large from Ward 2 in Newton. This episode is being recorded live on Tuesday, May 18th, 2021. This is the Cultural Connections podcast.
And good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Cultural Connections podcast. My name is Brian Ives, and I am the host and producer of the Cultural Connections podcast. Before I introduce our guest this evening, I want to remind all of our viewers that we are recording this episode live here on Tuesday, May 18th, 2021. This episode is currently being live streamed via Zoom on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. If you have a question at all throughout during the duration of our broadcast of this podcast tonight, and it'll be roughly about 40 minutes long, you can either comment below on the platform that you're watching from. So if you're watching on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, comment whatever platform you're watching on, but please be also aware that we can only monitor one feed at a time. So for about the first 10, 15 minutes of the broadcast, we'll be looking at Facebook. The second 10 to 15 minutes will be about Twitter, and the last remaining part of the broadcast will be on YouTube. So if you, whatever platform you're on, just be patient with us. Your questions, we'll try to get to them. So bear with us. If you don't get it right away, you don't need to repeat it. It will get answered. It'll be devoted given the time frame. So right now we're looking at Facebook. So without further ado, let me introduce our guest. He might be a familiar face here because he is our first returning guest to the podcast. We welcome back Tariq Lucas, who last time he was on, he was a candidate for city council. Now he is the counselor at large from Ward 2 here in Newton, Massachusetts. And we have a topic that I never thought here in Newton that we'd be talking about in at least all my years of living in this city, growing up in this city. And that is about a gun shop opening in this city. So we're going to be really diving deep into this controversial topic. And thank you, Tariq, for coming back today.
Oh, thank you so much, Brian. It's a joy to be back again. It was a good first time. I think it was maybe 3 or 4 months ago when I was on here last, and I'm super happy to be back again. Unfortunately, we're talking about a topic, as you just said. We didn't think about this particular topic during the course of the campaign, but it's here in front of us now, and this is the reality, and this is what we're working on the city council.
Absolutely. Well, I guess then let's start off with the basic question is, because I'm sure there are some viewers here that probably don't have a general idea of what it is that we're talking about. So let's start off with bringing us up to a basic, summarized fashion speed of what's going on and where are we today with this.
So back in January of this year, the Newton police received an application of an intent to open up a gun store in Newton. And what happens with this process is the gun store owner has to get a federal license, federal dealer license. And that goes through the ATF, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Department down in DC. And then in March, that background check was cleared by the ATF, and the Newton police began their own background check of the gun store applicant. When that passed, they had the ability to open up a gun store in Newton. And in Newton, the address is 709 Washington Street in Newtonville. The cross street is Washington and Harvard. It's about 500 feet from Cabot's Ice Cream. It's 2 buildings down from Garden Remedies. It's in that stretch of Washington Street. So the city council, or I found out about the gun store from a Newton Corner resident on Tuesday, April 13th. It was an email that I received from someone who I had never even met before, but they had sent me an email because they were concerned about a gun store opening up. And when I first received that email, I thought it was a joke. I didn't think it was serious. But then after a few days, it became clear that it was not a joke, and we were going to have a gun store opening up in Newton. And then at that point, I think I was the first Newton City Councilor to publicly announce that a gun store was going to open up. And ever since then, the City Council has been bombarded with probably close to 1,000 emails about gun stores in Newton, or a gun store in Newton. And we've gotten a wide range of opinions relating to the gun store. Should we have them? Should we not have them? That's kind of where we are right now. And I guess we'll go into it later on the show. Last night, the Newton City Council, we had a full council meeting, and we began discussing the potential zoning that we are allowed to have for gun stores. And this is all news to me because I had no idea Newton didn't have any gun store zoning or ordinances on our books. As a matter of fact, there's only a handful of Massachusetts cities and towns that actually have zoning related to gun stores. Mm-hmm. And the state law is the local police department, or your chief of police, they have to approve of a gun store, and they have to do their own background check and security site plan just to make sure that everything is, well, secure. And the Newton Police did that. And then that's it. It doesn't take a city council approval. It doesn't take a zoning board of appeals approval, planning and development board, none of that. It's just the police department, because it's treated in this state as regular retail, a retail operation, like you're selling books or pizza. It's basically treated like that. And this is all news to me. So we have a draft zoning ordinance on the table, in which one of the most important thing is that it will restrict a potential gun store to certain parts of Newton. But most importantly, it will require a 2/3 vote of the Newton City Council to approve a gun store opening up in Newton. And we'll go into more details as this show goes on.
Absolutely. Great. Well, so my next question to you is here with this. So as you mentioned that this gun shop was made, that they filed for their application through the Newton Police Department back in January. It's also been reported that Mayor Fuller knew about this gun shop as early as January. Do you find it at all concerning that she did not come to the city council to report this, to let them know, and that she just kind of let this go without notifying anyone on the council?
Yeah, it was concerning that I first heard about the gun store from a resident who lives in Newton Corner. And a lot of city councilors found out just through their emails. They didn't find out at first from the mayor. Our mayor, Mayor Ruth Ann Fuller, has said that she first found out about the gun store on the week of March 29th. Okay, that's what she said when she first found out about the gun store, was March 29th. I found out about it on April 13th. So there's still a 2 to 3 week delay in communicating from her office to the Newton City Council. And that is very concerning that, many city councilors didn't find out directly from Mayor Ruth Ann Fuller.
Okay. All right. Well, so let's move forward. We're going to come back to that in a little bit here. But let's talk about the zoning restrictions that are currently in place, or I shouldn't say in place, that are drafted up right now, that would, if we were to say that those were to be enacted, what is in those zoning reforms that would potentially, I guess, make it so that it'll be difficult for a gun shop to open?
So we are restricting a potential gun store to certain zoning districts in the city. They would be a manufacturing district or a business use for district. And in Newton, those particular districts are located, at least for the gun store, are located on Rumford Ave in Auburndale, and the Chestnut Hill Mall on Route 9.
Right.
There are, and also North Street. There are 2 North Streets in Newton, and they're each in Newtonville. Go figure. But the North Street that is close to the Waltham border, That is also a potential location for a gun store. And in the zoning, there are buffer zones where you have to be 150 feet away from a residential district. I think it's about 1,000 feet away from a recreation area, rather passive or active recreation area. There's a buffer zone for schools and a buffer zone for places of worship as well. And as a result, the potential locations where a gun store could locate, again, could locate, would be the Chestnut Hill Mall, North Street in Newtonville, near the Waltham border, and Rumford Ave in Auburndale. And the thing is, which is very, very important, which something which I had just found out in the past month or so, when all the gun store talk was picking up, is that if we pass the zoning by August 10th, we can retroactively apply it because the gun store at 709 Washington Street in Newtonville has not opened up yet. And that is extremely important. So once we pass the zoning or a ban, which we'll talk about later, once we pass either or both of those zoning ordinances, the gun store on Washington Street will not be able to open. And I am super confident that the city council will reach an agreement on either one or both of those measures, either restrictive zoning or an outright ban.
Okay. Well, that brings me into my next question here then. And that from last night, I had the opportunity to listen into the council meeting that went on last night. And from the viewpoint that I have an understanding on is that it doesn't appear that all the councilors were fully in favor of the next direction on how to take things and then some, most, it seems like, insisting on a full entire ban. Well, I get this understanding and feeling that some are calling for more the stricter restrictions rather than a total ban because of the legal situations is on this. What is your position on this? Do you think there should be a total ban, or do you think it should be a stricter restrictions?
I think the zoning can be a little stricter. And Councillor Lyle Baker, who is the ward councillor of Ward 7, which is essentially Chestnut Hill and parts of Newton Center and Newton Corner, he introduced 5 zoning amendments to the current draft ordinance for gun stores. And I am in favor of accepting most, if not all, of his zoning amendment recommendations. And that is just one aspect of, or just one piece of the puzzle. There are many other pieces that are still not at play. We can be more restrictive with the zoning and potentially with the special permit, ask the developer for making it essentially stricter for them to open up a gun store. And then of course, there's the outright ban. Last night on the Newton City Council, we discussed the zoning and the potential amendments that Councillor Lyle Baker introduced to the council. And me personally, I would love to talk about the zoning amendments in a committee of the whole as opposed to the full city council. It's two different meetings. The full city council is, you have the 24 city councilors and the city clerk essentially in one room, and we are discussing the zoning and potentially voting on it. A committee of the whole is kind of like a working session in a way, where we get to work with potentially the law department, the planning department, the mayor's office, and we can write the legislation there in a committee of the whole, then go to a full city council and vote on it. That's what I would like to do with the zoning ordinance that we have in front of us right now. Another advantage of sending it to the committee of the whole is that councilors Lenny Gentile and councilors Emily Norton, they have introduced a ban ordinance for gun stores in Newton. And there will be legislation will be written up for a potential ban in the coming days. And what I would ultimately like to have is a committee of the whole discussion in which we are talking about a ban and restrictive zoning. That's ultimately where I think is where we need to be, because we are getting bombarded with emails telling the city council and the mayor that in fact we can introduce a ban for gun stores in Newton.
Right.
Remember, the Second Amendment talks about the possession of guns, not not having gun stores in a particular city or town.
Uh-huh.
So we can potentially have a ban, but we need to talk about it first as a full council. And
Right.
if we are unable to pass a ban, we can certainly pass the zoning, but we should at least have the conversation to talk about a potential ban.
Of course, of course. Well, before we go further, I just want to again remind all of our viewers watching that we are recording this episode here live on Tuesday, May 18th, 2021. We're chatting with Tariq Lucas about the gun shop in Newton, Massachusetts. If you are watching and you have questions you would like answered during our live broadcast, you can either comment below on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube. At this time, we are monitoring the Facebook feed. We will shortly be switching over to the Twitter feed, and then we're going to end with the last 15 minutes of the broadcast over 10 to 15 minutes over on YouTube. So again, if you are on either of the other two platforms right now and you are not seeing your question answered yet, be patient and we will get to them shortly. Let's go here now back towards we're going back here with the mayor for a moment. I talked about this a few minutes ago. And my question to you about this is, should Mayor Fuller be held accountable for not making the city council, let alone even the public for this matter, know about this proposed gun shop when she found out about it, not at the time that she found out about it?
Yeah, I was, I'll be honest, I was disappointed that I found out from a resident of Newton Corner. We should have, especially the Ward 2 councilors, that would be City Council President Susan Albright, the Ward 2 councilor and Newtonville resident Emily Norton, and myself, who's a Ward 2 councilor at large. We at least should have been amongst the first to know about a gun store opening up. So I am very disappointed that Ruth Ann Fuller did not come to the city council first just to let us know that this was going to be happening. Also, why it was important for her to let us know is that we could have filed legislation essentially 2 to 3 weeks earlier, and we wouldn't be in this spot right now at this date on Tuesday, May 18th. So
Right.
we could have been, 3 weeks ahead of where we are now. Who knows? Maybe we could have already, maybe even potentially passed the ban or passed the zoning ordinance.
Right.
So yeah, it was very disappointing that she didn't tell the council at first.
Of course. Okay. Well, my next question to you here is, and this goes back into the ban the possible ban here that you were just talking about, and that it's clear that a ban on gun shops here in Newton, it has the likelihood that it will face many legal hurdles. Do you think the city is prepared for these legal hurdles? Should a total ban on gun sales be the official way of the way things go?
Yeah, so if we do go in the direction of an outright ban, it could face a legal challenge. Absolutely. The Second Amendment is a very important amendment. It's personal to a lot of people who live in this country and who live in our community. I found out just over the past few weeks that many people who I didn't, just assumed that they didn't own a gun. In fact, they do own a gun. And especially in these trying times of racial injustice, we are seeing more people buy guns and protect themselves, their families, and their property. So we could definitely face a legal challenge in a court of law. One of the great things about Newton is the people living in it, and there are a lot of wonderful people who live in Newton. And we have received a lot of emails from very prominent lawyers, legal scholars, people who argued cases at the federal level and at the Supreme Court, that in fact, if we do face a lawsuit, they would be willing to offer their services pro bono. Essentially, they would be offering their services for free to help the city defend its ban in a court of law. So we do have the resources available to us. The question will be if the city council does sign off on a ban, or if the city council approves a ban, and in fact it is challenged in a court of law through a lawsuit, would Mayor Fuller accept outside help from a law firm or from a handful of lawyers who have the experience of working in these type of situations? And that's what I would like to know, and that would certainly help make our job easier to determine if we are going to actually receive that help. Then yeah, why not? Let's go for it. 40,000 people die every year due to gun violence in America. This is an epidemic, and this is happening, in every state, every county, every city. Gun violence, happens everywhere in America, and we have to put a stop to this.
Of course, absolutely, 100% agreed. So let's talk here for a second then about the fact of where the three buffer zone locations. One of them is that you mentioned is on Rumford Ave, which is next to the Newton City dump, and apparently is also reportedly next to, I believe, a mental health clinic. What sort of things to say that we say it's a buffer zone, but yet we can think about putting a gun store next to a mental health clinic?
Yeah. It's actually a little bit more scary than that. It's a children's mental health clinic, I believe. And the thing is that this particular clinic, it's not in Newton, it's in Waltham. And this is something which, this is where I said this at the meeting last night. I think we're rushing through this. This particular clinic is in Waltham. And when the city council, planning and legal departments, when they were drafting this zoning ordinance, a lot of the work was done this past Thursday. That would have been the 13th. I believe that was the 13th of May. On that day, the land use committee, which I'm a member of, and there were a total of 8 city councilors on the land use committee, we were in our own committee meeting for 2 hours while the zoning and planning committee, other city councilors, the mayor's office, planning department, and law department were crafting and putting the finishing touches on the zoning ordinance. I did not have a chance to participate in that particular meeting because I had another meeting going on at the same time. So a third of the city council did not have a chance to give a helping hand in drafting the zoning ordinance and being better informed on what is in the neighborhood surrounding Chestnut Hill, Auburndale, Rumford Ave, and North Street in Newton. So that's why another reason why I believe the city council should discuss this, the zoning, in a committee of the whole, just so that we all can get on the same page and figure out what is the best course of action before voting on it. That's why I think that's what I believe is what we should be doing.
Absolutely. Now, my next question here, let's talk about that meeting last night, which definitely, for those that didn't see, was definitely a more tenuous meeting, to say it.
You can say that. You can say that.
To say it lightly. There are two things that come to my mind with this meeting. I mean, obviously, the councils are very passionate on their position on this. However, one of the things that at least I was a witness to of watching this was watching as the council president, Susan Albright, was stopping councilors from talking specifically about the ban, which, okay, apparently does not relate to Councilor Baker's amendments that he had talked about. But it seems like there's something else going on here, that the council president is stopping councilors from expressing a viewpoint. Do you think there's something more going on to this that we're going to find out in the coming weeks?
Well, let me just take a couple steps backwards and just describe what happened last night. So there were several city councilors, and I was amongst them, who wanted to essentially pump the brakes on the zoning and refer this back to a committee of the whole. And one of the hallmarks about sending it to a committee of the whole, as I said earlier, is that we can discuss the zoning potentially at the same time discussing a ban. And that was the argument which several city councilors were making. They weren't talking about the merits and the hallmarks of a ban and what might actually happen. They were just saying that, a ban could be on the table and that we should discuss the ban at a committee of the whole. And that was the reason why they were saying we should refer this back to a committee of the whole so we can talk about the ban.
Right.
That's where and we legally could not discuss, again, the hallmarks and the virtues of a ban.
Right.
That would have been a violation of open meeting laws, but we could reference a ban as to why we wanted to send it back to a committee of the whole so we can talk about it. And that apparently there was some confusion over that. And unfortunately, at the meeting last night, some of the conversations got a little heated. People interrupted one another. And if you were a first-time viewer like yourself, Brian, of a Newton City Council meeting, you would have thought, are they all like this? And the answer is no. When we talk about guns and the damage that they can cause, tensions can run a little high. The good news is that everyone on the city council would like to see some form of a zoning ordinance passed. And I guess the question is, how far do we go? But overall, we all want the same thing. The city council, we do not want to see gun stores in Newton.
Right. Right, absolutely. And I guess the question, well, actually, before I go further than that, I just want to again remind our viewers that we're recording this episode live here on Tuesday, May 18th, 2021. We're chatting here with Tariq Lucas, Councilor at Large from Ward 2. And right now, for the next few minutes, we're going to be monitoring the Twitter feed before we switch over to our YouTube feed for the last 5 or so minutes. So if you have questions and you're on either Twitter or YouTube, please feel free to comment your questions and we'll do our best to make sure that they get answered. My next question to you is thinking about, again, I mean, looking back, I at the meeting I also had the opportunity and to listen to the public hearing that was, I think, the week before, the Monday before, which a lot of people obviously were outspoken to that. And it was also there, I think last night, if I understood correctly, talks about another public hearing on this issue. Am I correct to understand that there is a possibility of another public hearing? And do you think that will make the conversation of figuring out what to do more complex? Do you think having another public hearing is the right way to go?
Well, so the public hearing, that would be the announcement of a ban.
Mhm.
We've already had a public hearing and we closed the public hearing for the restrictive zoning. If we do go forward with a ban, by law, we have to announce a public hearing. So it is a matter of choice. That's something that we have to do.
Right.
But a public hearing is great because then we hear people who live in Newton and have ties to Newton, and they can say whether or not they would support a ban or not. We could get a bunch of people showing up who are essentially do not want a ban, call them the pro Second Amendment, people who don't like restrictions on the Second Amendment. They all could show up and say, we do not want a ban.
Right.
So it's a great way for us to hear directly from the public. And, as I said, we've gotten thousands of emails. So we are reading the emails. And this is just another way for people to contact the city council. So there could be another public hearing coming up, maybe in the next few weeks, potentially, over a ban of gun stores in Newton. And that's something that, again, we have to do by law.
Right. I see. Now, talking about this possible ban, it seems as though, from last night, that there are a good chunk of the councilors that are in favor of that total ban. I mean, at least a good majority. Do you think that is the right next step to go, or should we focus more first on these zoning amendments that we have in front of us first?
So I was a code docketer for the ban ordinance. So essentially what that means is that I put my name on the legislation that I want to co-docket or a co-sponsor of the legislation. If you're asking me, would I vote for a ban? You know what? I honestly cannot answer that right now because I have not been given all of the information. I still would like to know what is the process of legal challenges to a ban. I need to hear from lawyers, multiple lawyers, not just one set of lawyers. I need to hear from multiple lawyers. What are the chances of the ban failing in federal court and having it overturned? And then if it is overturned, what is the next step? Can we fall back to our restrictive zoning? One set of lawyers, again, they don't work for the city of Newton. These are experienced lawyers who operate at the federal level and are constitutional lawyers and have argued cases before the Supreme Court. They say that even if a ban is overturned, we can fall back on restrictive zoning. So that is something I would like to have that conversation with our law department, our planning department, the mayor's office, and of course my 23 colleagues on the Newton City Council. I think that is a good thing just to have a conversation. That's all it is, just a conversation in a committee of the whole. Would you support a ban? And I'll just say this, to pass a zoning change that does not involve housing takes, by law, by Massachusetts state law, takes a 2/3 majority. So even if a majority of the city councilors, 13 over 24, do support a ban, that's still not good enough. We would need 16 city councilors to enact a ban on gun stores.
Right.
So we are still very far away. We're close, but at the same time, we're far away from a total ban of gun stores in Newton. Also because it's going to have to withstand several legal challenges, and that will take potentially several years.
Okay, well, with the last few minutes remaining, hard to believe already here, let's talk about then really what you mentioned. There's that committee of the whole meeting that hopefully will be scheduled sometime the first week of June. What is the next steps here? What is going to be happening next with making sure that hopefully counselors, because it looked like from last night we had half the council that appeared to just want to just get this off, get it over with, and just have it done and completely done with, and then go back later on and maybe make any changes that may need made.
The next steps are, the zoning ordinance was chartered last night. And what that means is that once an item is chartered, the debate ends immediately. And we cannot talk about it until the next full city council meeting, which is scheduled for June. I want to say the first week in June. So that's where we are right now in terms of the restrictive zoning. It hasn't been passed yet, but we can potentially pass the restrictive zoning in June. I would like to have a full committee of the whole meeting with the city council to discuss the zoning and potentially a ban. That's what I would like to see. So right now nothing has been approved yet. There was a vote last night whether or not we should send the zoning ordinance, the draft zoning ordinance, to a committee of the whole. And there are 24 city councilors, and I kid you not, the vote was 50-50. 12 city councilors wanted to send it to a committee of the whole. Another 12 did not and wanted to vote on the zoning, the restrictive zoning last night. And then the item was chartered by Councilor Emily Norton. She chartered the item. And when that happens, the debate stops, and we have to wait till the next full city council meeting to talk about it.
Right. So I guess then so there's obviously still further to go with this. Now, you mentioned earlier that there's the 90 days, not to rush this. Let's just go hypothetically though, in a way here. What would have happened last night if there was more than 12 councilors that voted for it, just to that zoning reform to go into place as it was? What would have happened last night?
So if I think what you mean, if 16 city councilors would have voted in favor of the zoning ordinance last night,
Yes, correct.
Then the gun store, then we would have had something on the books. We'd have had a zoning ordinance. We would have successfully amended our zoning code to restrict gun stores to certain parts of Newton. And then by law, the gun store on Washington Street would not be able to open. But as you just said, we have 90 days to pass it.
Right.
That 90 days is going to expire near the end. No, it was August 10th.
Yeah.
That is our deadline to pass the zoning. And we will pass the zoning by that time. The good news is that I contacted the Inspectional Services Department at City Hall, and the commissioner told me that the owner of the building has not even filed an application for a building permit just yet. And along with that application, I have my notes here. They need to identify their contractor, their plot plan, and where they're going to store their on-site combustibles.
Right.
So there's still many parts that need to happen just for that store to open, but we could always pass the zoning within these 90 days to prevent it from opening. So that's kind of where we are right now. We have plenty of time to prevent the gun store from opening.
Okay. Well, it's hard to think that we've already went through a 40-minute broadcast already on just,
I know. One topic
that I still say never would have expected in my lifetime here growing up in Newton to ever see this coming. But thank you again for coming on. I also want to remind our viewers that if you'd like to be more informed on this or learn more about it, you can find a lot of the details that are being talked about this, especially when these meetings are. It's important to have your voice heard as residents at the city's website, www.newtonma.gov. A lot of the information is there. And I implore you to really think about this issue, if you, especially those watching from Newton that live in this city, to really listen to this, watch this over, and think about what you're hearing about, because this will be a lasting representation of what our city looks like 20, 30 years down the road. So definitely think about that. With that said, thank you again, Tariq, for coming on. If anyone has questions or comments or suggestions for future episodes of the podcast, don't hesitate to get in contact with me. You can email me at brianives@gmail.com. That's BRIANIVES@gmail.com. And I'm always happy to hear suggestions and glad to hear what you have to say about the podcast. So thank you again, everyone, for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Cultural Connections podcast. I'm Brian Ives. Thanks for watching.
Thank you again for joining us for this episode of the Cultural Connections podcast. To learn more about this episode, be sure to check out our social media pages on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also listen to this podcast in its entirety on listening platforms Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Breaker, Radio Public, New TV, and many more of your favorite podcasting platforms. Thank you again for joining us on this episode of the Cultural Connections podcast.